Hi. Um, this is something that I have pondered on a lot. It's something I've given a lot of thought to, as some of the sentiments I will be expressing here are not necessarily sentiments I would have had, say, 10, 15 years ago. Whether it's because I've become more hardline, whether it's because I've become more informed, as I see it, I don't know. But I accept that the tone that I'll be delivering here is a contentious one. I believe it's the absolutely correct one, but I accept that it looks contentious. It looks, or rather, it looks controversial because terms like treason and traitor shouldn't be casually thrown around, and I certainly don't. But in recent years, it's become very obvious that there are people. I'm going to narrow the geography a bit here to the United Kingdom. I was going to say people in the West, which is also true, but I'll just narrow it a little bit. People in the United Kingdom who really do not have this country's interests at heart. Rather, they have the interests of the Chinese and Russia governments at heart. Now, whether it's from incredible naivety on their part, whether it's from ideological bias, and I think that's part of it, I'll come back to that in a second, or whether it's just greed. All those components maybe come into it, but I think that it's certainly those things are the components of their approach. So, how big a scale is this? How many people are we talking? I don't know, honestly, I don't know. And I certainly don't want to come across as a paranoid sort of ultra patriotic type who's sort of like, oh, communists in the cupboard, that sort of thing. I really don't think this is paranoia. I do think there is credible empirical evidence that there are people working against the interests of this country, yet they're British citizens. Um, and it frankly infuriates me because I love my country. I care about my country. But what particularly infuriates me is the lack of action that's taken. Now, is this from lack of evidence? I don't think so. I think it's just the lack of real willpower because we are so hung up on the West with the notions of free speech, important as that is, that I think, sometimes turn a blind eye to those who would do us harm. Now, if you were to say what's the biggest threat to Western liberal democracy, I think there's a few things. Certainly, pan Islamist terror is a big one. International terror more broadly, but particularly pan Islamist terror. Um, China and Russia, absolutely. We cannot trust them. Iran, to a lesser extent, I'd say to a lesser extent simply because it's not as powerful as China and Russia. Um, and I also feel that the culture wars are deeply damaging the West. I've spoken about my contempt for woke ideology. I have just as much contempt for the alt-right conspiracy types, QAnon and so on. I think they're just as damaging and destructive to the West as woke ideology is. I think they're both a problem. And I think that Russia and China will absolutely lap up these things. They love to see the cultural wars in the West because it's good for them. It makes it, what was it Putin said at the Geneva summit? What about George Floyd? All the whataboutery that Putin came out with. The problem is, it's true. There is tensions in America. So Putin, he's not an idiot. He knew full well that that sort of thing, the American side can't deny. Um, but that doesn't mean that Putin suddenly has a moral high ground. He doesn't. He has no moral high ground as far as I'm concerned. But it's just a point that that will be used. Biden can turn around and say, "Well, the man who killed George Floyd is now in jail." Um, People had the democratic right to protest in favor of George Floyd. There was a rigorous debate in American society about George Floyd. Biden could counter with all these things, which is also true. But totalitarian states are very good at this. They're very good at kind of turning it around in that way. Um, but they're going to do what they're going to do. I wouldn't put anything past Beijing or Moscow. They are totalitarian regimes, particularly Beijing. Um, and the only thing they care about is power and control. That's it. They don't give a damn about humanitarianism. All they care about is power and control. So they're going to do what they're going to do. What they feel is in the national interest. It's not to condone it, but that's what they're going to do. What I think is unforgivable, absolutely unforgivable, is Westerners, and again to narrow this down, Britons, who actively prop up these regimes, albeit it might be in a very small way, but they're still doing it. And I think that's lamentable. Now, people might say, well, Nathan, what about free speech? Don't they have the freedom of speech to say they support the Russian and Chinese governments? Um, yes, they do. They do. But I do think that with that must come scrutiny. So I'm not saying if someone takes a pro Russia or pro China stance, they should be locked up as a traitor. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they should face scrutiny for it and potentially an investigation if they're, for example, in a position of authority and they're taking that position, i.e., they're not just an average Jill or Joe on the street, then I do think it warrants scrutiny because they may well be getting involved in, if not espionage, at least, well, something just as bad. Actively trading secrets and so on. Um, for example, there is information that academics has been reported to academics in Cambridge, no less, and other universities have been actually sharing important information, data, and so on with their counterparts in China with links to the military complex over there. That is incredibly alarming. At best, they're being incredibly naive and they think they're just having this cross cultural thing with fellow physicists. But the point is, in China, everyone has connections with the Communist Party. So a Chinese physicist might just be a physicist, but he or she will have to report to the CCP because they've no choice. So any Chinese national who's in a position of any authority, whether it be in science, military, academia, or otherwise, um, somewhere along the lines, they're going to have CCP links. It might not mean that they're a diehard communist, but they have to. It's Chinese law. They're constitutionally bound to hand over any information that they have. In this country, of course, because we're a democracy, you need court orders and you need very credible evidence and so on. Um, so I don't believe that when academics are doing this, it's hard to believe that they're that stupid that they would be giving this information and think it's totally harmless. I do feel that, and I made a previous video about this. I do feel that in tertiary education, where we have these sort of supposedly cross-cultural departments, is very one-sided. It's very much about praising China and oh, let's have a great golden era and let's never talk about human rights. Let's never talk about the very real differences. Even if you want to leave human rights to the side, I don't believe it should be, but let's just say for a second it is put to the side. We have different values in general. Um, I've never had a problem with cross-cultural exchanges if that's genuinely what it's all about. But I don't believe it is. I don't believe that Confucius Institute, for example, are only interested in promoting, say, Chinese music or um, the fashion of the Tang Dynasty or something like that. I do think that because they're funded by the TCP, there will inevitably be a political agenda there. So I really, really think we need to take this very seriously um, because it's happening. I mean, there was that professor I quoted, whose name eludes me off the top of my head, but for him to say that there should be no debate about the persecution of Uyghurs in case it offends the Chinese, um, what a moral card, what a despicable position to take for a leading academic. Like I say, I sent him an email and told him so. I did threaten him. I don't do that, right? Um, and do anything illegal. But I feel that if someone is in a position of authority, then, they need to be open to criticism. That was my criticism. I told him very clearly what I thought of his position. I think it's reprehensible that you have academics in this country trying to silence debate in case it offends the Chinese. That's not a neutral position. When you side with an oppressor, you take when you're neutral in questions like this, then you're taking the side of the oppressor. You can't say, oh well, let's just hear both sides when the Chinese side won't allow any dissent over there. But he isn't even saying that. He's saying let's not hear both sides. Let's just be careful. Let's be sensitive with the Chinese side. No way. We should not be pandering to their sentiments in this country. Frankly, it infuriates me, that sort of mindset. I think a lot of our universities, I think there's kind of a battle going on. To be fair, I think there will be academics out there who know that there's a problem with this, you know, and they probably are speaking out. So I don't believe that every single academic involved in Sino-British relations is a stooge of China, but I believe that there is a worrying number who are. Now, whether it's genuinely that they're Sinophiles and they love the culture and they're kind of being blinded, because this is quite easy to do. If you start really having affection for a country and a culture, then you start finding excuses for its government, even though there should be a clear dividing line, because I think it's totally compatible to love aspects of Chinese culture, um, and that side of things, whilst, you know, uh, recognizing that there's clearly a red line there. No, I'm quite proud of myself, I have to say. I've been to China twice. I've worked and studied there. Excuse me, I've worked and lived there. Yeah, studied in a sense, self-studied. I've learned the culture, and it was some of the happiest experiences of my life. The second time around, it was a lot more controlling and atmosphere had changed, but nevertheless, I had a very good experience. People were very hospitable to me. My colleagues showed me around. I have no complaints in the way I was treated. Nevertheless, I always had to be careful what I said, always. Even with people I liked and got on well with, I was constantly aware that I was in a different dynamic. And I'm proud of myself that I never ever sold out. I never praised communism. I never emigrated the West to the point of just doing it for their favor. I would have had conversations where we discussed cultural issues, but Um, I'm proud of myself. Some Westerners go to China and they think that being open-minded means bashing the West. That's not being open-minded. That's being a useful idiot. And I've seen this. Now, it might be the genuine conviction as opposed to just trying to be comfortable, but it's a conviction I strongly disagree with. Um, then looking at Russia, you know, um, when I hear Western voices on RT, American and British and Irish accents, particularly British, I frankly want to throw up. I feel disgusted because these people are lying through their teeth. The way RT distorts things, and yeah, sometimes makes outright lies. It's and they're engaging in it, and they know they're doing it. Now they might say, "I'm just a journalist. I'm just taking jobs where there is jobs." It might be that RT has a particularly lucrative way of getting journalists to work for them. I don't know what their marketing techniques are in terms of the employment side of things, but you can be damn sure that when someone works for RT, they are under pressure to toe the line. There was that famous incident during the Ukraine war when the RT correspondent, to her credit, resigned on air. In fact, that happened twice. Now, I'm not saying I would necessarily hold them up to be great. I know one of those women is now kind of gone into conspiracy theory territory, but nevertheless, that shows you, what sort of pressure is going on behind the scenes at RT. But I also think there's people who are ideologically there. As for Western correspondents who work for RT, What is it? I don't know what their salaries are. It must be quite generous. But for them to get behind a microphone and to advocate for the Russian dictator, to speak against their own country in that sense. Now, why is this different from a BBC correspondent, criticising the British government or something in the UK? It's different because the BBC, for all its faults, it is a British network. This is why I don't think it's the same dynamic. I think that the likes of the BBC and Sky News and other networks in this country, there's plenty of ground to criticise them on. So it's not a case I'm saying the BBC can't be criticised. It's never been my position. But one thing you can't accuse the BBC of is simply being a stooge of the British government. I know that some Corbynites would take that view, but it's a misguided view. That's not the case, and there's very little evidence to show that that's the case. Um, an organisation as a bit as big as the BBC isn't going to please everyone all the time, but it is a British Broadcasting Corporation. It might be too woke, it might be biased to the left, but it is a British Broadcasting Corporation. Therefore, I would make the point that there's no comparison in terms of because there will be some on the right who say that the BBC are traitors because of the way they report things. I think that's a bit heavy on the grounds that it's about the BBC doesn't work for Russia, it doesn't work for the Russian government, it doesn't work for the Chinese government. There's times when they're painfully politically correct to the point of being absolutely absurd. Um, and I would, fiercely condemn them for their lack of coverage in things like the grooming bans, for example. But I do think there's a different dynamic from that and a network that was set up by Russian ultranationalists with the sole purpose of promoting Russia in a positive light and trying to cast a shadow over Western society, which has been doing from day one. I mean, think about it. Has RT ever said anything critical about Putin? Never. That to me speaks volumes. So really, RT is just, as far as I'm concerned, is little better than a branch of the Russian government. They'll deny that, of course. They will say they're independent, but the agenda they're pushing is so blatantly obvious. So, at the time of Salisbury, I was disgusted hearing some Britons actually advocate for Russia. Jeremy Corbyn, when he got up in Parliament and said, "Oh, we need to hear the Russian point of view," I felt rather disgusted. I mean, it's pretty much to be expected from Jeremy Corbyn. This is a man who appeared on RT numerous times, who chaired the Stop the War Coalition, which is an organisation that says and does minimal at best to condemn the Russian and Assad governments. I mean, I think an organisation like Stop the War Coalition will never, ever, ever take a neutral stance when it comes to international issues. And that would be fine, except that their bias is against the West. This is not a case of being jingoistic and saying, "Oh, you must fly the flag and be ultra patriotic." I wouldn't impose that on anyone. I think that would be over the top. And it's not an easy thing to take this sort of position because I don't like it. I don't like pointing fingers at my fellow citizens. I don't enjoy it. But I feel more strongly about what they are doing, about enjoying all the freedoms that come with this country, yet propping up totalitarian regimes that crush freedom at home. It's it disgusts me quite honestly. Um, so some people might look at this like McCarthyism, paranoia, but we are in a very real situation here. As for McCarthyism, incidentally, I've looked up a lot of material on that, and I think McCarthy went too far. I definitely think he went too far, but I also think that the Red Scare wasn't entirely based on paranoia. I mean, at the height of the Cold War, is it really implausible that there were Soviet operatives in the United States? Is that really implausible? So my thing with the Red Scare is it went too far, to the point of, people having to prove they were real Americans and so on. It got quite ugly, and there were no doubt innocent people caught up. But I also feel that McCarthy's been a little bit vilified. Okay, he vilified others, but I don't believe that there was absolutely no espionage going on in the United States at that time. And today, I don't believe that my position is paranoid. I don't believe that, these academics who are pandering to China or journalists who are pandering to Russia, I don't believe they have innocent intent. I think they tend to be intelligent people. So the chances of them simply being naive seem far fetched. I think it's more likely that they are motivated for ideological reasons. Now, if Russia commits another attack like it did in Salisbury, I really do think some of these people should be charged with, if not treason, at least aiding and abetting the enemy or something. I mean, there's probably no law with that, but frankly, I think we should have a law. I think we should have a law um, that states if you're working for the propaganda of a hostile foreign state, then you are basically committing a treasonous act. As it stands in law, what they're doing isn't illegal, it's not treasonous by legal definition. But I think maybe it should be, quite frankly. To put it bluntly, I think it should be because I'm thinking of those people who died at Salisbury. I'm thinking of the disgusting way that RT basically mocked that event. I messaged Ofcom the other day and I told them, among other things, RT doesn't take them seriously. RT laughed at them. Margarita Simonian, the RT chief editor, her attitude in response to the fine that Ofcom issued was scorn and ridicule. This is a woman who is absolutely ultra nationalist in her outlook. That's how RT operates. And the smarminess of them, even the general approach I do not like. Even leaving aside the propaganda, I don't think they're particularly professional in the way they go about things. Even if it was a more neutral network, the way they go about things is pretty unprofessional. They treat conspiracy theories as news. Slicer said, despise RT. I will watch it sometimes with clenched teeth because I hate it, but I'll watch it to see what the latest angle is. Predictable, of course. Um, but I really think, I'll just close with this. If people think I'm being a bit too hard here or a bit over the top, I would simply ask you to consider what is the context we're in today? Do we have good relations with Moscow and Beijing? And if you accept that we don't, I'm talking about government level here. If you accept that we don't, would you accept that people who are actively advocating for those regimes, therefore, by definition, are advocating against the United Kingdom? I mean, you get obvious examples where this is the case. You get the likes of Alex Salmond on, the Alex Salmond show on RT. Now, Alex Salmond wants to break up with the United Kingdom. This is a man who, diplomatic front that he might put on, he does not like the United Kingdom. He wants to break it up, you know? So it makes absolute sense that he would go to a Russian network that is anti-UK. So really, I think that it's not far-fetched to come to the conclusion of the things that I'm saying here. I want to be clear. I am not suggesting that anyone with any affection for Russia or China is harassed or given a hard time. I would never advocate that. And I haven't advocated it in this video. Because hell, that would include me. You know, if if this notion of treason and so on was really taken out of control and it was really put into hyperbole, then people might say, "Oh, Nathan, you're a traitor. You're pro-China because you worked and lived there for a while." I never ever sold out. I'm very proud of what I done, which was helping young people to learn the English language. That was it. If any of those students asked me about my views, I wouldn't have told them in class because I wasn't allowed to. But if they asked me outside class, I wouldn't have lied. I wouldn't have lied. I know some Western teachers who, there was one guy who was teaching us, one of the students asked him, what did he think of communism? Now, in the classroom, I probably would have said, I'm not really allowed to talk about politics. Maybe I could discuss it after the class, something like that. He said, well, I think communism has worked out well for China. No, I'm not going to condemn him because it was in the, circumstance of teaching over there. It's not easy you know, to be very honest, and maybe that was his genuine view. But I'm pleased I never done that. And there were a few occasions where I was asked after class what I thought. And I told them. I basically said, look, please don't repeat this because it could cost my job. But I think that a system where people can have their point of view is better than a system where they can't. Not those exact words, but I, I put something out there. And I was always careful because, when you're over there, you have to be. But yeah, I'm not at all suggesting people who, are interested in Chinese culture, or for example, they have a Chinese partner or a Russian partner, or maybe they're studying the works of Tolstoy or something like that. Well, that's all harmless. I have no problem with that. That's fine. But when you get to the point of people actually advocating the CCP regime or the Russian government, and I do think they deserve scrutiny at the very least. Condemnation and criticism, definitely, but scrutiny as well, especially if they're in a position of power or influence in any way. They need to be scrutinized. I'd have no problem with GCHQ investigating some of these professors who are selling out to China. And if they want to whine about academic freedom, then they need to consider, are they contributing to academic freedom by saying people shouldn't be debating human rights? They're not contributing to that value. I'll round this up, but that's how I feel about it. It's not a pleasant feeling, but it's an honest feeling. And I do think we need to take a harder line at people who mean this country harm.